welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books, and welcome to Sunday. Welcome to my wrap-up of the reading that I've done in the month of May. A little bit early because May doesn't finish until Wednesday, and I am still reading a book. But yeah, let's get the... No, May finishes on Tuesday, guys. But yeah, let's get the reading wrap-up done. First of all, I'll start with my stats, because you know I love a stat. So this month I read 12 books. I borrowed one from my sister, which accounts for 8% of my reading. I owned 5 of them, which accounts for 42% of my reading, which actually I feel very pleased about, that I'm reading books that are on my shelf. 3 of them were from the library, which is 25% of my reading, and 3 of them were on audio, which is another 25% of my reading. So in the grand scheme of things, guys, I've read 60 books so far this year. One of which was borrowed, which counts as 1%. 17 I owned, so that's 28% of my reading. 16 I've got out from the library, which is 27% of my reading. One of my reading resolutions this year was to use the library more, so I'm absolutely delighted with that. Oh, Minnie's just eating her biscuits out there. 20 of them were done on audio, so either via the Audible app or on Libby, and that's 33% of my reading. And 6 were proofs or books that the publisher sent me, which is 10% of my reading. So those are the stats. Should we move on to the books? As I said, 12 books this month. Let's start with the first one, which was the one I borrowed from my sister. This is something new, Tales from a Makeshift Bride by Lucy Knisley. Now, I borrowed this from my sister, but I actually bought this from my sister when she got engaged. So this is a graphic novel about getting engaged and planning a wedding and trying to do a lot of it yourself. So if you've ever got friends that have got engaged and you'd like to get them a little present, I really highly would recommend this. I've read Lucy Knisley books in the past. Some I've really liked, some I found her a bit sort of sulky. There's one where she goes on holiday with her mum to France. A lot of her graphic novels are around food, which obviously I love. There's one where she goes on a long holiday with her mum to France, and she is so awful on that holiday to her mother. I was like, oh. So I went into this feeling a bit like, well, I've loved some of her books and disliked some of her books, but I really liked this. And a lot of our sort of views on marriage and engagement sort of aligned, which was really nice to read. And also some of the sort of like wedding plans she's doing align with my wedding plans. We're getting married in a registry office, and then we're having a do back at David's parents' house, which is similar to her, except her mum lives in like a massive, she's got a massive field, and they're having a barn built to get that wedding. But like we're celebrating the wedding back at David's parents' house. So yeah, there's a lot in there that aligned and a lot that made me chuckle. I really like the things like weird wedding facts and things like that. I enjoyed it very much. And the illustrations are definitely my bag, like this sort of like bright colour palette with just lots of speech bubbles and things like that. I very much enjoyed it. So yeah, as I said, good gift for people who have got married, got engaged for the run-up. So yeah, very much enjoyed that. Then the next one was The Secret Life of Church Ladies by Disha Filyar. This was the best short story collection I've read in such a long time. I described it in my notes as all thriller, no filler. So every single one of these short stories was really great, and I loved them. Like even like the longer form ones compared to the shorter form ones. There's one in here called Snowfall that really reminded me of me and David, and in particular me and David during lockdown. So in this instance, it's not a lockdown, but it's a heavy snowfall that's resulted in a couple being sort of like trapped in their own home. And then them doing things to sort of entertain themselves, like cranking up the heat and making it a tropical, and getting some cocktails and doing like a tropical party, and like reminded me of like when it was lockdown for David and I. We would like do a fake cinema night, or I'd make the lounge into a pub and put a pub soundtrack on YouTube and things like that. It really reminded me of it. But yeah, I love this. And as the name suggests, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, each of these individual stories are linked to a woman who attends the church. But it's not sort of religion based, it's more sort of community based and relationship based and things like that. I really liked it. Serious like subjects covered here, as well as light stuff. I just thought it was really pulled well together. And yeah, I loved it. I will definitely be looking out for more of Disha's stuff. Loved it. Gave it 4 stars. Brilliant. The Great Gatsby, the graphic novel up next by F. Scott Fitzgerald. David's mum bought me this for Christmas, so I've been looking forward to reading it. And I really I'd read The Great Gatsby before many times actually, because it was one of the first sort of like modern classics I remember reading and actually understanding what was going on and feeling sort of like the way I guess you're meant to feel when you're reading this. There's lots of sort of like tragedy but opulence and things like that, and that is all really well reflected in this graphic novel. The one thing I will say though is that I really struggled. I loved the sort of like muted toned colour palette, and the women in here are particularly drawn well, but the men, like, I really struggled to differentiate between these men's faces, like particularly Tom and Gatsby, which is probably the main people you need to be able to differentiate before. This isn't a very good example because it's quite a darker scene, and you can see that we've got Gatsby with like lighter hair and Tom with darker hair. But in some of these, they honestly looked almost identical, which I found really, really difficult. But yeah, I enjoyed the illustrations, and if you like the story, then I imagine you'll like this very much. Next up is a library book, which I've returned now, which was Remote Sympathy by Katherine. This was on the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. And I read this. It didn't make to the shortlist. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this, and it's hard to use the word enjoyed when such horrific things are covered in this book. So you're following a woman and her husband who, well, there's 3, maybe even 4 timelines, so sort of like 3.5 timelines here. You're following a woman whose husband is working as an administrator for a concentration camp, and she has moved into this lovely big house, and you can get whatever you want, and you only have to say if you want new curtains, and they'll get the people in the concentration camps to knock you up a pair of curtains. And like you're following her point of view, also his point of view as well, so finding out what he's up to. Then you're following somebody, a man who is in the concentration camps. Now I can't really tell you how how their storylines intertwine without telling you the plot, so it's difficult to say that, but I thought the way they intertwined was beautifully done, and I thought the plot, sort of constructed around historical fact but sort of fictionalized in places to make it more readable, was really well done, but still delivering on the sort of hard facts of what was going on in the concentration camps around that time, which is fucking awful. It's just atrocious. But I thought it was really well researched, and it sort of left room for dwelling on what was going on in this book, as well as I said, delivering the hard facts. The 3 timelines and the perspectives, 4 timelines and perspectives, really complemented each other very well, and it was actually one of the Women's Prize for Fiction longlist books that I enjoyed more out of all of the ones that I read, because as I've said, I haven't been super impressed with the Women's Prize longlist this year. None of them have really wowed me. The Great Circle, or Great Circle being one that I loved, this one probably being the next one that I enjoyed, maybe. Sora and Bliss I also enjoyed, but I'll talk about that a bit later on. Yeah, I had sort of questions as it was going on, which were then answered in this book, which I always feel pleased about. I like to feel resolved once I've read a book. But yeah, I think it will stay with me for a long time, and I discussed it a lot with the people around me while I was reading it. I remember talking to the woman I share an office with at work, talking to her about it, sort of telling David what was going on and things like that. So yeah, it definitely affected me a lot, but would if you were looking to read a book from the long list, like I said, this was definitely in my top 3 of books that I enjoyed. So yeah, there we go. Then next up was an audiobook of Spring by Ali Smith. This is the 3rd in the seasonal quartet, although it's got a companion piece now, so it's the 3rd in the quintet. Is that what you call? And like, I really go up and down with Ali Smith, because like one minute I'm loving it and understanding it and really, really getting it and enjoying sort of like the more experimental stuff, and when you're listening to it on audio, maybe the experimental stuff doesn't come across quite as much as if you were to look at it on the page. Like, I don't know if you've read Ali Smith's books, but there's a lot of sort of like punctuation experiments. Some words are written in big, some words are written in small, paragraphs and things all sort of go out the window. But when you're listening to it, I think it's a more sort of accessible way of doing it. But even when I was reading this, actually weirdly, when I was listening to this, I was thinking, because I knew I owned Spring, which is here, I knew I owned it, but I didn't think I'd got round to reading it. And it wasn't until right at the very end, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, I've read this. But like, it took me literally like 80% of the book to realise that I've read that. So it feels very fresh coming at it at from an audio point of view. But yeah, I just don't know. Like, and I was enjoying it, because some points I was enjoying it, and at one point I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get Summer on audiobook, and I'm going to get the companion piece out from the library, and I'm going to read all of these this year. And then when I finished it, I was like, oh god, thank god that was over. Honestly. But Winter by Ali Smith is one of my, like, I've really, really enjoyed reading that and listening to it as well. I've read it and listened to it. So yeah, it's really hit and miss with me. And like I say, quite experimental. So this sort of what I do enjoy about the seasonal quartet, because I should probably go into more detail. I could be holding up this Spring here. What I do, careful matches. What I do enjoy about this seasonal quartet is that they're very much written of the time, so they feel very current, which I imagine happens with a lot of books, but because they were sort of churned out really quickly, one year after another, you've got themes in here about Brexit, about immigration centres and things like that. So yeah, I sort of feel very tuned into the world when I'm reading this, because a lot of sort of stuff that's been going on in the past sort of 5 years is still happening today. But yeah, I just afterwards, like I said, I thought, oh God, like, thank God that's over. But then I still do want to read Summer now with a bit of time away from it. So yeah, it's a bit, I think it's an acquired taste. And I don't think that's an unpopular opinion. I think a lot of people would say that Ali Smith is an acquired taste. It's really dark outside, considering it's only like early afternoon. Then next up was another audiobook, bit of a disappointment as well. This was Snap by Belinda Bauer. This was my first Belinda Bauer and I had really high hopes for it. As I said, my colleague, as I said, I haven't said that, as I've already mentioned my colleague, but she's read a Belinda Bauer book recently that she was absolutely beside herself about, saying it was so, so good. I can't remember what it was about. I think it's about assisted suicide, but I can't remember what it was called. But this was Snap, and so I went into it with high hopes, thinking, oh, this is going to be really good. And I quite like reading a thriller every now and again. It doesn't happen super often, but I thought, oh yeah, that'll be good. And then I was even more pumped because the guy who plays Adam in The Archers was reading it, and I was like, oh, this is different, because I'm listening to like somebody whose voice I'm used to. But yeah, I felt like it was really bitty and disjointed, and the main police officer at sort of like the head of the investigation was very sort of laissez-faire about protocol and things like that, and that just annoyed me a bit, just like this book not being back on the shelf is annoying me a bit. I could have done that afterwards. I don't know why I needed to do that now. But yeah, so I didn't love it, and I gave it 2 stars. There was parts of the plot I was like, yeah, maybe I'm into this, maybe I'm into this, but I couldn't tell. Also, I don't know if this is a problem with Libby, because it feels mean to be marking a book down on this, but this definitely added to my sort of unenjoyment of the book, was that when I listened to it on Libby, it wasn't broken down into chapters. You were literally listening to like the whole like 600 and something minutes of it, so I couldn't see when it was a new chapter, so I couldn't ascertain whether it was a new person narrating or a different time period, because it sort of flew in between that. So yeah, that definitely didn't help. Whereas when I'm listening to it on, not always, it was just this book on Libby I've noticed did that, but when I've listened to things on Libby before or on Audible, like, it's definitely broken down into chapters, and I can think, oh, we're in a new place now. But I didn't know that because it was just one vast chunk. So yeah, I didn't like it, and sadly that led to it. Next up is 6 Tudor Queens, Anne Boleyn, The King's Obsession. Now I've returned this to the library as well. I will link below my reading vlog of this book, because I'm working my way through reading all of the 6 Tudor Queens series. And I've done Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Next up, Jane Seymour. And I've been very much enjoying this. I dress sort of like themed as the queens from the musical 6, and sort of like consume other Anne Boleyn content, as you will see shortly. I've listened to another Anne Boleyn book, and yeah, I really enjoy the whole process of it. I didn't bond with Anne as much as I did with Katherine of Aragon. When I finished the Katherine of Aragon book, I was like, oh, I miss Katherine. But this, which is unusual as well, because actually Katherine's book spans her whole long life, and in the same amount of pages as Anne's life, Anne's shorter life is spanned. So you got to know Anne a bit more, but I didn't bond with her as much as I did Katherine. And I wonder if, because I don't think Alison Ware has like the bestest, like, I don't think she's a big fan of Anne Boleyn, is what I got from reading it. So yeah, there was stuff in there that I was really, really surprised about. I was like really surprised at how sort of long the courtship between Henry and Anne went on for. I'd always been led to believe that she was much more of a sort of temptress and sort of tricked him into a quick marriage and things like that. And I had an idea of that from the Katherine book, but obviously she didn't know all the time it was going on. So yeah, it was, I was surprised that how long the courtship went on, and then basically when he had her, he just got really tired of her. There was a very, very grim and sort of affecting final scene for Anne. It's not a secret, she gets beheaded, and that last scene and the run up to that last scene was really awful. Like, she's sort of told she's going to be beheaded one day, and then that doesn't happen, so she gets herself in a sort of like mindset thinking, I'm going to die today, her brother's already been executed, I'll be with my brother by sundown. Then that doesn't happen, then she's told she's going to be killed at 9 the next morning. That 9 comes and goes, it gets to midday, she's told, no, that's not going to happen, we're going to get, so like, she's really getting herself in this mindset of like preparing herself to die, and then it keeps not happening, and then the actual like beheading scene is really grim. So I was very, very affected by that. I, as am ever, looking forward to the Jane Seymour book as well. That's the 3rd one. I'm going to be reading that in July, so looking forward to that. But I'm really having fun doing that series. And as I said, I'll link I might make a playlist of it actually. So there's a Katherine of Aragon vlog and an Anne Boleyn vlog. I'll link the Anne Boleyn vlog down below, but you'll be able to find it, I'm sure. Then, as I said, further Anne Boleyn content was devoured because I also listened to The Other Boleyn Girl by by Philippa Gregory. This was very entertaining, and sort of knowing a bit about Anne Boleyn now, expert, this was very sort of like, but the Boleyn sort of action, but amped up. It really sort of like leans heavily on incest and leans heavily on potentially witchcraft in here as well. And yeah, it's not sort of like fiction, it's very fictionalized exaggeration of actually what happened. What have I written here? Audiobook included quite a few bad and not always present accents. Oh, okay, yes, I do remember what I mean by that, because at some points in this book, Anne has a French accent, but at other points she doesn't. And yeah, it was sort of like fluctuated in between, which is unusual because it was Amelia Fox who did the audio, and I've listened to other audios by her, and she did I've really enjoyed her audio, so yeah, that was confusing. This is also not the book's fault, but because I was sort of like in Anne Boleyn's brain and was also reading, so I listened to this on audio, but was also reading Six Tudor Queens book. This is from the perspective of Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister, and I kept reading it thinking it was from the perspective of Anne and getting really confused, but it's not, it's Mary. So yeah, I thought this was entertaining, but yeah, I definitely like knew that it wasn't true fact. Now I'm such an Anne expert. Next up was Many Different Kinds of Love by Michael Rosen. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get through this without crying, because this is such, I've never cried so much when reading a book, and like sometimes I'd literally have to just pick it up and be like, oh, like it's so sad, but also filled with so much love and kindness and joy. So this is Michael Rosen, who is, you may know him from We're Going on a Bear Hunt, a children's author, and he caught COVID in the first sort of like lockdown of COVID, and this is his journey. So the first sort of section is split into journal entries. This is a bit where I may well cry. Journal entries of a journal that he had at the end of his bed, and the nurses on ITU when Michael was in a coma would come and write in there, and they're sort of like saying things like it had been Michael's birthday, and they got everybody in the ward to sing happy birthday to Michael and put up all cards that his family had sent him, like this man is in a coma, like there's just so much care in here. Like imagine doing that like for someone. It's just such a lovely thing, and there's lots of moments in here where I cried just because of the time and effort and all of these volunteers. These are people like physiotherapists who have been taken off of their daily caseload to come and work in ITU and risk their lives to treat these people, and it was just so beautifully constructed, because like I said, the first bit is about all these different entries and things like that, of what them caring for him. It's also filled with poetry, when Michael's recovery and his rehabilitation and going back home and things like that, and him sort of feeling hopeless. And also it doesn't sort of like sugarcoat the NHS as like a everything goes right in the NHS all the time. It's like, oh, I've been told someone's going to come and see me today to talk about me going home, and nobody's been able to do it because they're understaffed. And like it talks about those sort of like the bad bits of the NHS as well, which could do with fixing. But yeah, and the love between Michael and his wife Emma is sort of highlighted. You see a few of her text messages that she sends to people to say how Michael's doing and when he gets put in a coma and things like that. And there's just so much, yeah, there's just so much love in this book, and so much sort of sadness and like hope and kindness and grief, and like Michael sort of like grieving for the life he had before and things like that. And yeah, I was just so moved by it, and I bought it, I don't even think this year, I bought it, I don't even know how well you're going to be able to see this because it's very light cover, and I think I'd been a bit frightened to go to it because like I'd read a few pandemic novels during the pandemic, but not many, I'm trying to think of COVID things I'd read. The Fell I think is the only thing that I'd read, and I enjoyed The Fell. I know a lot of people were like, I can't read this is too raw, and I think I went to this thinking this was going to be too raw. And it was, and it opened up a lot of sort of like early memories for me working in a hospital and what it was like, and sort of like the fear around that, but also sort of just made me feel so happy hearing about Michael's experience and how well cared for he was. But yeah, I can't talk about it much more because I will cry. It's just so emotional. I cried like literally the whole time I cried, the whole time, but loved it. Next up was a book I didn't cry at. I whooped with joy because I loved this so much. This was Welcome to Your Life by Bethany Rutter. Now this is a women's contemporary romance. I know, and I loved it. And it's focusing on a fat woman and her, after her sort of running out on her wedding day, and sort of then looking for what she wanted rather than what she thought she deserved. And I loved that premise, and I loved the main character here, Serena. I thought she was really sassy and like believable and real and flawed, which doesn't always happen with these books. When I've read previous books, these women who've sort of or normally they've been stood up by a man, so it was refreshing to sort of have somebody run out on their wedding day of a seemingly perfect relationship. And like, it wasn't perfect for her. Like, she didn't feel fireworks, or like she didn't feel that this guy that she was marrying, she just thought they'd been together a long time, and because she was fat, she thought that was what she deserved, and she didn't think she'd ever get any better than him. And I really sort of enjoyed her coming to terms with like getting what she wants rather than what she thinks she deserves. I really like that. I also love the impassioned writing in here about London. It's set in London. Serena doesn't live in London, but when she breaks up with her, when she walks out of her wedding, she moves to London to live with a friend. And there's a whole section about like what she loves about London, and really like, just I could see London so vividly. I'm not a massive visitor of London. I don't get there often, probably about 2 or 3 times a year, even less the last two years. But yeah, there's like bits, and I remember so vividly like walking behind a theatre and seeing the auditorium from the view of the stage, and she's talking about the sights and the sounds and the smells of London and all of that. And I really enjoyed that, and sort of like without sounding like I'm in my GCSE English class, like London as a character in this, which I really liked. And I loved the sort of like representation in here of female friendships and of sisterhood. Her sister's definitely like, why have you walked out on your husband? Like, it was going all right, why didn't you just stay with him? And like her reaction to that, and them having fallouts and getting back together, it felt real. It didn't feel sort of exaggerated or anything like that. I really liked that. And also, as always in these sort of books, there's a sort of creative element. Quite often the main character has like a creative element, and Serena's creative sort of thing was that she makes clothes, and I loved hearing about her process of making clothes. And like, it actually made me want to wear, I consider myself a fat babe, and it made me think, oh, why haven't I been getting my shoulders out? I always think, like, because I consider myself quite confident and body positive, body confident, I would say. And yeah, but I still sort of wear things where I don't get my shoulders out and things like that. And I was thinking, why don't I? Like, I can look amazing. But yeah, I really liked it. I thought this was a perfect summer reading, very life affirming. If you're going on holiday this year, definitely give this a go, because I really liked it. Next up was Sora and Bliss by Meg Mason. That 2-week sticker, I got it read within the 2 weeks. It's got to go back on Monday. I read this because it was on the Women's Prize long list and is now on the Women's Prize shortlist. It was the only one on the shortlist I haven't read, so I've now read the whole shortlist. This was sort of really funny in parts and really sad in parts, quite troubling in parts. I found it, like, I remember when I was reading it, I was thinking it was like a sort of dark Bridget Jones. There's a character, so we're following Martha, and you learn quite early on that she's walked out on her marriage, and she's got some mental health issues. But you sort of go back and hear about her childhood and her sister, her relationship with her sister and her mother and her father and her auntie, and all of these sort of relationships coming in. But her first husband really reminded me of sort of like an evil Daniel Cleaver, the things he said. I mean, Daniel Cleaver wasn't an angel by any means, but like sort of he was, I guess, a bit softer around the edges than her first husband in this book. And yeah, I really enjoyed reading about that and just sort of like guffawing and being like rolling my eyes and stuff. But yeah, early doors I thought, oh, this is a bit like a darker Bridget Jones. And then as it went on and you heard more and more about her mental illness and the sort of like effects it was having on her relationship and on her job and on her life and everything, it was really confronting and disturbing. Like, what I also thought was very interesting, and I mentioned this when I was doing my lovely chat, is that they never name her mental illness. So, and towards the end actually in the notes it says that this is based on a sort of fictional mental illness, but it definitely draws on different different mental illnesses like psychosis or bipolar. I sometimes wondered if that's what she had, but just by not naming it, I thought it was a really clever thing, and like very sort of affecting to me. I enjoyed it, enjoyed being affected. But yeah, I was unsettled and disturbed by those parts, because I was just like, this poor woman, how is she ever gonna cure herself? And like sometimes she'd she'd start feeling a bit better and then wouldn't continue with her therapy and stuff like that, and it was just so frustrating. And there's a really, like, a scene in here that I think will stay with me for a long time. Like, I've suffered with mental health problems in the past, anxiety being the main thing, and different to what I was suffering, but I remember having conversations with people and people not believing, but feeling awful that they didn't know how bad things were. One of my things was that I gave up drinking because it made me feel very, very depressed and very sad. And like, I think a lot of my friends sort of through my 20s had been a bit sort of scathing of the fact that I'd given up drinking, because I hadn't been able to, I just hadn't felt like I'd been able to tell them that I'd given up drinking, because I felt like I wasn't very fun anymore and things like that. So I was like, oh, it just gives me awful hangovers. No, it's not worth it, it's not worth it. When really it was that it made me feel like deeply, deeply sad and deeply, deeply anxious. And when people found out that that was the reason, a lot of people were like, oh my God, I wish you'd just said something. And I think, oh God, I wish I'd just said something as well. But there's a point in here where she's having a conversation with her sister and she says, oh, I just wish I didn't exist anymore. And her sister's like, yeah, but you don't mean that. And she's like, oh no, I really do. And her sister just didn't, I don't think she really understood the sort of gravitas of her situation. But yeah, I thought it was really great, and I like the family set up in here and things like that. They have a Christmas reunion every year, which obviously I loved. But yeah, interesting. Up there with the top three. This is probably like this, Remote Sympathy and Great Circle were the only ones on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list that I really enjoyed. So there we go. And then the last one, I haven't written any notes about this last one, and I'm also not going to go into deep detail about it because I'm hoping to get this video up pretty shortly. It's Sunday and it's going up, and we haven't discussed this in Patreon book club yet because it's tonight. Hello my Patreons, if you're ready for it. And I've got 20 pages left of this, and this is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey. Like I said, I'm not going to go into deep about my thoughts about it because I like to give that information to my Patreons first. But yeah, I've very much enjoyed this. This is about Inti Flynn, who is a woman who works with wolves and is the head of a project of returning wolves to the Scottish Highlands. And her and a team have come over there, and they're sort of they're facing a lot of backlash from the community, who are worried about them eating their cattle, about them eating the deer, about them attacking humans, things like that. Then a farmer gets attacked, and they're sort of like, what happens, the fallout of that. There's also stuff in here about sisterhood and stuff like that. I very, very, very much enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to editing this and then reading the last 20 pages and then writing my questions for Patreon book club tonight. So there we go. There are the 12 books that I read in the month of May. A good reading month, I would say. A good reading month. What have you read in the month of May? Have you read any of these books before? Would be very interested in hearing from you. And I'll see you all again on Wednesday. Bonus video this week. Wednesday for my June TBR. See you then. Bye.